Saris had been practicing his wing-folding technique for 3 months, and he still knocked someone's briefcase off their arm at least once a week. Today it was a Pelian businessman who grunted but didn't complain. Everyone on Transit Station Gamma 7 had learned to give each other grace during rush hour. There were 47 different species trying to get through the same turnstiles every morning, and patience had become the unofficial station motto. The dragon squeezed through the barrier meant for human-sized bodies, careful to tuck his tail just right. His blue scales scraped against the metal frame with a sound that made his teeth ache, but he'd gotten better at it. Much better than his first week, when he'd gotten stuck for 20 minutes while station security tried to figure out how to extract a 2-ton dragon without calling the fire department. Platform 12 stretched ahead, already crowded with the morning commuters. Saris could smell the coffee from Griff's cart, that bitter, wonderful scent that meant civilization. Real civilization, not the isolated mountain peaks where he'd grown up. Not the cold caves where dragons sat alone counting treasure that nobody wanted to steal anymore. A Quesh family rolled past him, their blob-like bodies shimmering pink in the platform lights. The youngster waved a pseudopod at Saris, and he carefully waved back with one claw. The parent made an apologetic gesture, but Saris just smiled. He'd learned smiling. It took practice when you had that many teeth. "Large today, Saris?" Griff called from his cart, already reaching under the counter. "Please," Saris rumbled, his voice deeper than he meant it to be. He still hadn't mastered the indoor voice thing. The Pelian pulled out a mug the size of a soup bowl, specially made and kept just for him. Saris felt something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with his fire glands. 3 weeks ago, Griff had just started keeping the mug there, never made a big deal about it, never asked for extra payment. Just saw a problem and fixed it quietly. That was what humans did, apparently. They saw problems and fixed them, usually in ways that helped everyone. Saris paid with his station card, the one he'd gotten modified to work with his claws. Everything here had modifications, little adjustments that let everyone exist together. The Vorns had crystalline bodies that chimed when they moved, so the audio announcements included visual signals. The Quesh couldn't use stairs, so there were ramps everywhere. Dragons couldn't fit in standard seating, so the trains had reinforced standing areas with high ceilings. Nobody was asking anyone to change what they were. They just changed the spaces to fit everyone. The hypertrain hummed into the station right on schedule. Saris had been riding this exact train for 2 years now, ever since he'd fled his homeworld and everything he was supposed to be. The doors opened with that familiar hiss, and the crowd shuffled forward with practiced efficiency. Bait was already in her usual seat, tablet in hand, reading something that made her frown in concentration. She was human, middle-aged, always wore comfortable shoes and a jacket with too many pockets. She'd never said more than "excuse me" and "have a good day" to Saris in all these months, but he'd started thinking of her as a constant, like the coffee cart, like the conductor's crystalline voice announcing stops. Today, though, she looked up as Saris positioned himself in the standing area near her seat. Their eyes met for just a second, and she smiled before going back to her reading. Saris's hearts did something complicated. The train lurched into motion, and Saris automatically adjusted his stance. He'd gotten good at this too, at moving with the rhythm of the train, at being just another body in the flow of commuters. Around him, dozens of species swayed together, heading to their jobs in the city center. He worked as a data analyst for an interstellar insurance company. It was boring work, the kind of boring he'd dreamed about when he was young, and everyone expected him to be impressive, terrifying, powerful, alone. Dragons weren't supposed to want ordinary things. They were supposed to want dominance and gold and fear in the eyes of lesser beings. But Saris had never wanted any of that. He'd wanted to know what it felt like to have neighbors, to say good morning to the same people every day, to worry about being late for work. His tablet buzzed with a notification, probably his mother sending another message about duty and heritage and disappointment. He ignored it. She'd been sending those messages for 2 years. They'd probably continue for another century at least. Dragons were patient when it came to grudges. The train slid through the tunnel, smooth and fast, carrying hundreds of people who had places to be. Outside the windows, the station blurred past in streaks of light. Humans had brought hypertrains to the galaxy 30 years ago, and everything had changed. Not because the trains were particularly advanced technology. Lots of species had fast transportation. But humans had built them for everyone, every species, every body type, every need. And then they'd made them public, made them affordable, made them normal. Bate turned a page on her tablet and Saris caught a glimpse of the screen. It was a book about Earth mythology, about dragons. He could see illustrations of scaled creatures breathing fire, terrorizing villages, hoarding gold in mountain caves. His ancestors, his legacy, everything he was supposed to be and everything he'd run away from. Bate glanced up again, caught him looking, and this time she didn't look away. "Sorry," she said, her voice quiet enough not to disturb other passengers. "I hope this isn't rude. I'm reading about dragons. Are you familiar with Earth mythology?" Saris felt his translator chip warm against his skull as it processed the question. He could say no, could pretend he didn't know or didn't care, could go back to being invisible. Instead, he said, "I know it. The stories get some things right, most things wrong." Bates' eyebrows went up with interest, but before she could respond, the conductor's voice chimed through the speakers. "Next stop, Central Plaza, doors opening on the left." The moment passed. Bate gathered her things, gave him a small smile, and joined the flow of passengers heading for the doors. Saris stayed where he was. His stop was 3 more down the line. But something had shifted. Someone had asked him about being a dragon, not with fear, not with awe, just with curiosity. His tablet buzzed again. This time he looked. It wasn't his mother. It was a message from the Dragon Council of his homeworld. Official, formal, concerning. 3 representatives will arrive at Transit Station Gamma 7 in 7 days. You will meet with them regarding your obligations to your kind. This is not optional. Saris's coffee suddenly tasted like ash. Outside the window, the station blurred past, all those lights and lives and ordinary beautiful chaos. He didn't want to leave. For the first time in his long life, he finally had something he didn't want to lose. The train carried him forward anyway, just like always, toward whatever came next. The coffee cart. Line moved slower than usual. A Vorn child kept trying to count their credits, but the crystalline fingers made the coins slip everywhere. Griff waited patiently, not rushing, while the parent made apologetic chiming sounds. Nobody behind them complained. This was Platform 12. Everyone had been that person fumbling with payment at some point. Saris waited his turn, thinking about the message from yesterday. 7 days. The council representatives would arrive in 7 days, and his quiet, ordinary life would probably end. Dragons didn't understand choosing a smaller life. They'd call it weakness, betrayal. They'd demand he return home to his cave, to his isolation, to being properly impressive and terrifying. He didn't want to go back to being terrifying. "You look troubled, mate." Griff had the large mug ready, already pouring before Saris even reached the counter. "Rough morning." "Something like that," Saris admitted. He'd gotten better at small talk, though his first few months he just nodded and tried not to breathe fire by accident when nervous. "Well, coffee fixes most things," Griff said, adding an extra shot. "And what it doesn't fix, it at least makes bearable." That was wisdom right there. Saris paid and carefully wrapped his claws around the warm mug, feeling the heat seep through his scales. This right here, this moment. This was what he'd wanted his whole life without knowing how to name it. Someone remembering how he took his coffee, someone noticing when he looked upset. Community, that was the human word for it. The hypertrain slid into the station with its usual hum. Saris had learned all the sounds by now. The slight squeal on the third car's brakes. The way the doors on car 5 stuck for half a second before opening. The specific chime pattern the conductor used for Central Plaza versus Downtown Hub. He boarded, positioning himself in his usual spot. Bate was already there, same seat, but today she looked up immediately when he entered. "I wanted to apologize," she said before he could even set his coffee down. Yesterday, I shouldn't have asked about the book. That was presumptuous. No, Saris said quickly. No, it was fine. I just wasn't expecting conversation. Bate smiled, and it reached her eyes in that way humans had. I'm Bate, by the way. I've seen you on this train for months, but never properly introduced myself. I'm a xenoanthropologist. I study how different species integrate into mixed communities. Saris, he replied, feeling his nervousness settle a bit. I'm a data analyst, very boring compared to your work. Boring is underrated, Bate said. She held up her tablet, showing the dragon mythology page. I'm actually researching integration patterns. Dragons are fascinating because traditionally your species is solitary, but here you are commuting daily with 47 other species. That's unprecedented in dragon history. It was unprecedented in his personal history too, but Saris didn't know how to explain that. How did you tell someone that everything they took for granted, the casual greetings, the shared spaces, the simple act of standing next to strangers without violence, was magic to you? The book gets dragons wrong, he said instead. We're not obsessed with gold. We collect things, yes, but that's not the point. We collect because when you live alone for centuries, objects are the only constant. Gold doesn't die. Gold doesn't leave. Bates' expression shifted to something softer. Understanding, maybe. So the hoarding isn't about greed, it's about loneliness. Nobody had ever phrased it that way before, but yes, exactly yes. The mythology also gets the fire-breathing wrong, Saris continued, feeling more confident. We don't breathe fire when we're angry. We breathe fire when we're scared or defensive. Terror makes us dangerous, not rage. A small Quesh child rolled down the aisle, moving too fast, and bumped into Saris's leg. The parent rushed over, colors flashing apologies in patterns Saris's translator, Chip, rendered as mortified concern. Oh stars, I'm so sorry. He's still learning spatial awareness, please don't. Saris carefully lowered himself down, bringing his massive head to the child's level. The little Quesh stared at him with wide sensory nodes, trembling slightly. It's okay, Saris said gently. I'm still learning spatial awareness too. I knocked over a briefcase this morning. The child's colors shifted from frightened purple to curious orange. A tiny pseudopod reached out, hesitant. Would you like to touch my scales? Saris asked. They're not hot, they're actually quite cool. The parent looked shocked but didn't intervene. The little Quesh pressed their pseudopod against Saris's snout, feeling the texture of his scales. Wonder replaced fear in those color patterns. Pretty, the child said in the simple way. Children had of distilling complex things to their essence. Thank you, Saris replied. You're pretty too. The parent managed to corral their child back to their seat, but kept glancing back at Saris with an expression he was starting to recognize. Surprise mixed with reassessment. The look people got when their expectations crashed into reality, and reality was gentler than expected. Bate was watching him with that same studying expression she probably used in her research. You're very good with children, very patient. Children aren't born afraid of me, Saris said. They only learn fear if adults teach it to them. I'd rather teach something else. His tablet buzzed, another message from the council. He looked at it, felt his fire glands heat with stress, and quickly set the tablet face down. Bad news, Bate asked. Saris hesitated. He'd never told anyone here about his situation, about being a disappointment to his entire species, about representatives coming to drag him back to proper dragon behavior. But Bate had kind eyes, and she'd called him unprecedented, like that was a good thing. Representatives from my homeworld are coming, he said quietly. They want me to return. They think living here, riding the hypertrain, working an ordinary job, they think it's shameful, weak. What do you think? Bate asked. Nobody had ever asked him that before. What did he think? Not what was traditional, not what was proper. What did Saris himself actually want? I think, he said slowly, that I've never been happier. I think riding this train every morning is the best part of my day. I think knowing Griff saves a special mug for me matters more than any gold hoard. I think. He paused, looking around the car at all the different species, all going somewhere all together. I think humans taught the galaxy something my people never learned. What's that? That being together is better than being superior. The conductor chimed the Central Plaza stop. Bate gathered her things but didn't stand yet. How long until they arrive? She asked. 6 days. Then we have 6 days to figure this out, she said, and the way she said we made Saries' hearts ache with gratitude. The train moved on, carrying them forward, carrying them together. Saries' apartment was built for medium-sized species, which meant it was approximately 3 sizes too small for a dragon. His tail curled around his makeshift bed, his wings pressed against the walls, and his head barely fit through the bathroom door. He'd looked for larger housing when he first arrived, but this place had a window. The window faced the hypertrain lines. From here at night, he could watch the trains crisscross through Transit Station Gamma, 7 like glowing veins carrying life through the structure. Blue lines, red lines, green lines, all moving on their schedules, all carrying people home or to work or to visit friends or to start new lives. The window was worth the cramped space. Tonight he couldn't enjoy the view. His tablet kept buzzing with updates from the Dragon Council. They'd sent specifications for where he should meet them, not at the station proper, not at the transit hub. At Landing Bay 7, the area reserved for private ships and important visitors. Dragons didn't use public transportation. Dragons arrived in style, making statements, reminding everyone they were old and powerful and not like ordinary beings. Saries hated Landing Bay 7 already. He'd tried to work after getting home, pulled up his insurance data files, attempted to focus on risk assessment algorithms. But the numbers blurred together. 3 days. The representatives would arrive in 3 days, and he still hadn't figured out what to say to them. His communicator chimed with a different tone. Not the council, Bate. I've been researching dragon culture, her message read. Found some interesting historical precedents. Can we talk tomorrow, same train? Saries typed back with careful claw movements. Yes, thank you. 2 words felt inadequate for the gratitude he felt, but humans seemed to understand what words couldn't carry. He fell asleep watching the trains move through the dark, trying to memorize the pattern of lights in case he never saw them again. The next morning, Platform 12 felt different. Word had spread somehow, the way news always spread in close communities. Griff had his large mug ready, but also added a pastry. On the house, the Pelion said firmly when Saries tried to pay. Everyone needs extra sugar when dealing with difficult relatives. The Vorn family from yesterday waved their crystalline appendages in greeting. The Quesh child rolled over with their parent following, and the little one pressed against Saries' leg, and what he'd learned was their version of a hug. Be brave, the child said in simple words, colors flashing. Encouragement patterns. How did they all know? Saries hadn't told anyone except Bate. But apparently Bate had told others, or others had noticed his distress, and now the entire platform seemed to have decided they cared about his problem. This was what community meant. Your problems became everyone's problems, not as a burden but as a shared concern. Bate boarded the train with a physical notebook this time, old-fashioned paper filled with handwritten notes. She sat in her usual spot and gestured for Saries to come closer. I found something, she said, keeping her voice low. Dragon culture has this concept called the trial of worth. When a dragon's choices are questioned by the council, they can demand a trial to prove their path is valid. I know about trials of worth, Saries said carefully. They're usually combat-based, demonstrations of strength, fire-breathing contests, things I'm not good at anymore. Usually, yes, Bate agreed. But here's the interesting part. The historical texts say the challenger gets to define the terms of the trial. The council sets the question, but you set the test. Saries felt something spark in his chest, not fire but hope. They'll question whether I'm still a proper dragon, he said slowly, thinking it through. Whether living here has made me weak. And you get to define what strength means, Bate finished. What tests would prove dragon worth to you, not to them, to you? The train hummed through its tunnel, and Saris looked around the car. Dozens of species, all different sizes and shapes and needs, all existing together in a space that made room for everyone, all heading somewhere that mattered to them. Integration, he said. The ability to exist in a shared space without causing harm, to be powerful without being destructive, to be different without being separate. Bates' smile was fierce and proud. That's brilliant. Can they refuse if you phrase it as a proper trial? Dragon honor codes are very specific, Saris said. If I invoke the trial of worth correctly, they have to accept. But, he paused, doubt creeping back. They're old, Bate, ancient, set in their ways. They won't understand why this matters. Then we'll show them, Bate said. She looked around the car, seeming to calculate something. How many people ride this train during rush hour? This car, about 80. The full train, maybe 500. And how many species? 23 different species use this line regularly. Bates' smile got wider. Saris, what if the trial wasn't just about you? What if it was about proving that what humans built here, what all of you built here together, is actually stronger than the old dragon way? The conductor chimed the approach to Central Plaza. Around them, passengers started gathering their belongings, preparing for their stops, moving with practiced coordination that came from riding together every day. They arrive tomorrow, Saris said quietly. At Landing Bay 7, they expect me to meet them there. Will you? Saris thought about his cramped apartment with its perfect window view, about Griff's coffee cart and the saved mug, about the Quest child who thought his scales were pretty, about Bate, who'd spent her own time researching dragon law to help someone she barely knew. Yes, he said, but not alone, would you? Would you come with me? Of course, Bate said immediately. Then she paused, that researcher gleamed back in her eyes. Actually, I have a better idea. What if everyone came with you? The train slowed for the station stop. Through the windows, Saris could see the platform, could see dozens of people waiting to board, all of them part of this strange, wonderful community that had somehow become his home. Everyone, he asked. Everyone, Bate confirmed. If they want to judge how you've changed, let them see exactly what changed you. Let them see what you've become part of. It was audacious. It was unprecedented. It was possibly the most undragon thing he could imagine. Saris loved it. Okay, he said. Let's show them what happens when you actually let people in. Bate squeezed his forklaw gently before standing to exit. See you tomorrow, Saris. Same time, same platform. Bring your courage. I'll bring my friends, Saris replied and realized he meant it. He had friends, actual friends, more valuable than any hoard of gold. Landing Bay 7 was designed to impress. High ceilings, polished floors, dramatic lighting that made every arrival look like a staged performance. Saris hated everything about it. This was the opposite of Platform 12's comfortable chaos. This was where people came to remind everyone else they were important. He stood near the arrival gate, trying not to fidget. Bate stood beside him, looking completely calm in the way humans did when they were actually nervous but refused. To show it, behind them, spreading out across the bay in a way that looked casual but was absolutely deliberate, stood about 50 other beings from the morning train. Griff had closed his coffee cart for an hour. The Vorn family had brought their children. The Quesh parent and child were there, colors cycling through supportive patterns. Even the conductor had come, their crystalline form chiming softly with each small movement. They're going to be confused, Saris said quietly. Good, Bate replied. Confusion is the first step toward understanding. The arrival display chimed. Ship EF-872 from Dragon Homeworld Designate had docked. Saris felt his fire glands heat with anxiety. His scales itched. His tail kept trying to lash even though he forced it to stay still. Bates' hand rested gently on his forearm. Just a touch, just a reminder that he wasn't alone. The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. 3 dragons emerged, and the bay suddenly felt much smaller. Vorath came first, ancient and massive, his red scales darkened with age, his eyes sharp and judgmental. Behind him walked Shrenis, lean and cruel-looking, her green scales polished to an intimidating shine. Last came Dulmech, the quietest of the council representatives, gray-scaled and thoughtful in a way that was somehow more unnerving than the others' obvious aggression. They moved with the absolute confidence of beings who'd never been challenged, never been questioned, never been told no. Vorath's gaze swept the bay and landed on Saris. Then, with visible disdain, moved to the crowd gathered behind him. "This is how far you've fallen," Vorath said without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Surrounded by lesser beings, hiding behind them like prey." "I'm not hiding," Saris said, forcing his voice steady. "I'm introducing you to my community." Shrenis laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Community? You mean your pets? Your amusing little collection of inferiors who tolerate you because you've made yourself harmless." The Quest child's colors flashed angry red, but their parent quickly pulled them back. Griff's fur bristled. Bates' expression went very cold in that particularly dangerous way humans had. But Saris stepped forward, putting himself between the council representatives and his friends. "I invoke the trial of worth," he said formally, using the old language that his translator Chip rendered as archaic dragon dialect. "My choices have been questioned. I claim the right to prove my path has value." Vorath's eyes narrowed. Beside him, Dulmech's expression shifted to something like interest. "You dare," Vorath said slowly, "you dare invoke sacred tradition while standing in this public transportation hub, surrounded by beings who can't even fly." "The trial of worth doesn't specify location," Saris replied, his heart hammering but his voice clear. "And I choose here, I choose now, I choose these witnesses." "Very well," Vorath said, a cruel smile spreading across his features. "We set the question. Have you maintained dragon strength and dragon pride, or have you become weak and diminished by this pedestrian existence?" "Accepted," Saris said, "and I define the tests." That made Vorath pause. Ancient tradition was absolute. Once invoked properly, the challenger set the terms. Even the council couldn't override that without breaking their own laws. "Speak your tests," Dulmech said quietly. Saris took a deep breath. Around him, he felt rather than saw his friends move closer, not interfering but supporting. Present. "3 tests," he said. "First test. Navigate Platform 12 during morning rush hour without causing delays or harming anyone. Prove you can exist in a shared space." Shrenis snorted. "Absurd. Dragons don't navigate around lesser beings. They move aside for us." "That's the test," Saris said firmly. "Second test, ride the hypertrain for 1 complete route. Follow all protocols. Show courtesy to other passengers. Prove you can integrate." "This is not strength," Vorath growled. "This is submission." "Third test," Saris continued, ignoring him. "Demonstrate that you can be trusted by those smaller and weaker than you. Prove that power doesn't require fear." Silence fell over the landing bay. The 3 ancient dragons stared at Saris like he'd just suggested they eat dirt. "These aren't trials," Vorath finally said. "These are humiliations. You're asking us to behave like them." He gestured dismissively at the crowd. "Yes," Saris said simply. "I'm asking you to prove you can do what I do every day. If it's so beneath dragon dignity, if it's so weak and shameful, surely 3 council representatives should find it trivially easy." The trap was so obvious that even Shrenis saw it. If they refused, they admitted these simple acts were actually difficult. If they accepted, they had to actually try to integrate, and Saris suspected they'd fail spectacularly. Dulmech made a sound that might have been amusement. "Clever. You've learned tactical thinking from your humans." "I've learned a lot of things here," Saris agreed. Bates stepped forward, her researcher voice clear and confident. "For the record, as a xenoanthropologist, I'm officially observing this trial. All tests must be completed in good faith, with genuine attempt at success, or they're invalid by cultural integration standards. And who are you to set standards? Shrenes demanded. I'm Dr. Bate Coleman, chair of the Xenoanthropology Department at Transit Station University, Bate said calmly. I've published 47 papers on integration patterns. I'm also Saris' friend, and I'm not letting you cheat. The word friend echoed through the bay. Saris felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with fire. Vorath looked at Bate like she was an insect that had dared to speak. But Dragon honor held, and she'd invoked official observer status in a way he couldn't dismiss. Fine, Vorath said coldly. We accept your ridiculous tests. Tomorrow, morning rush hour, will prove these tasks are beneath notice and that you've wasted your strength on meaningless gestures. Tomorrow then, Saris agreed. Meet us at platform 12, 7 in the morning. We don't use public platforms, Shrenes started to say. You do now, Griff called from the crowd. If you want to judge our Saris, you ride our trains. The ancient dragons looked at the gathered crowd, really looked, and for just a moment Saris saw uncertainty in their expressions. They'd expected to arrive, overwhelm him with presence and tradition, and drag him home. They hadn't expected resistance. They definitely hadn't expected solidarity. 7 in the morning, Vorath repeated, turning back toward the airlock. Don't be late, though I suppose punctuality is another of your newly acquired pedestrian habits. They left, taking their dismissive superiority with them. The moment they were gone, the crowd erupted in conversations. The conductor chimed an encouraging pattern. Griff was already planning what kind of coffee might challenge ancient dragon taste buds. Bate turned to Saris, her expression both proud and worried. They're going to fail, you know. They won't be able to help themselves. I know, Saris. Said, that's what I'm counting on. Tomorrow everyone sees what they really are and what I've become. Platform 12 at 7 in the morning was always controlled chaos, but today it felt like the entire station had shown up to watch. Saris arrived early, positioning himself near the turnstiles where the council representatives would have to enter. Bate stood with him, tablet ready to document everything in her official observer capacity. The regular commuters were all there. Griff's cart was doing record business. The Quesh family had claimed their usual spot. The Vorn children chimed excitedly, their crystalline bodies catching the platform lights. Even people who normally used different platforms had shown up, word having spread through the station's communication networks. Nobody was saying it out loud, but everyone knew what this was really about. Saris wasn't just proving himself to the council. He was proving something about all of them, about what they'd built together here. At precisely 7, the 3 ancient dragons approached the platform entrance. They looked completely out of place. Their scales gleamed with old power, their movements carried centuries of assumed dominance, and their expressions radiated contempt for everything around them. Several commuters actually backed away instinctively before catching themselves. First test begins now, Bate announced, her voice carrying across the platform. Navigate to platform 12, board the 7:15 train, and complete the journey without causing delays or harming anyone. Vorath approached the turnstile. He was too large for it, obviously, but that was the point. Saris fit through it every day by folding his wings just right, tucking his tail at a specific angle, lowering his head and moving with careful precision. Vorath simply pushed through with brute force. The turnstile buckled, metal shrieked, people nearby jumped back. That's destruction of station property, Bate said calmly, making notes, and causing distress to nearby passengers. First test failed already. Ridiculous, Vorath snarled. The entrance is inadequate. It fits Saris fine, Griff called out. He manages every day. Shrenes tried next, attempting to slither through with more grace, but her wings caught on the frame and she instinctively lashed out, her tail smacking a support beam hard enough to leave a dent. More property damage, Bate noted, and you nearly hit that Pelian child. It should have moved, Shreni said coldly. Children have right-of-way on all platforms, the conductor chimed, their crystalline voice carrying undeniable authority. Station Regulations, Section 47. Dolmetsch was last. He studied the turnstile for a long moment, watching how other passengers moved through it. Then, carefully, deliberately, he folded his wings and lowered his head. He got stuck halfway through. The platform went silent. An ancient dragon, easily 3 times Saris' age, wedged in a turnstile designed for human-sized beings. It should have been funny. Instead, it was somehow sad. "Would you like help?" Saris asked quietly. Dolmetsch's eyes met his, pride warred with practicality. Finally, he nodded. Saris walked over and gently adjusted Dolmetsch's wing angle, showing him the specific fold that made it possible. "You have to rotate here, then tuck the left side first. It's not intuitive." Dolmetsch followed the instructions and slipped through. "You do this every day." "Every day," Saris confirmed. They moved toward the platform proper. Rush hour was in full swing now, with hundreds of beings flowing in practiced patterns. The ancient dragons moved through them like boulders in a stream, creating turbulence wherever they went. Voreth stepped directly into someone's path, expecting them to move. They collided. The person's coffee spilled. "Watch it," the person snapped, then saw what they'd bumped into and went pale. "You watch where you're going," Voreth rumbled, fire flickering at the edges of his nostrils. "Actually," Bate said, "you stepped into occupied space. By platform etiquette, you were at fault. You should apologize." "Dragons don't apologize to." "Then you fail the test," Bate interrupted. "Courtesy is required for integration." Shreni's tried to move toward the coffee cart, but she went against the flow of foot traffic. People had to dodge around her. The crowd's rhythm disrupted. Frustrated mutters followed her wake. Griff watched her approach with his arms crossed. "Back of the line, miss." "I don't wait in lines," Shreni said. "Then you don't get coffee," Griff replied cheerfully. "House rules." "This is absurd," Shreni's hissed. "We're being judged by beings who should be grateful we even acknowledge their existence." The Quest child rolled up to Voreth, their colors cycling through curious patterns. The parent tried to stop them, but children had their own logic. "You're shiny," the child said, "but your mean Saris is nice." Voreth stared down at the small blob-like being with complete incomprehension. Here was something tiny, helpless, that should be terrified. Instead, it was criticizing him. "Get away from me," Voreth said. "That's not nice," the child said, colors flashing disappointed blue. The parent finally retrieved their offspring, but not before giving Voreth a look that communicated volumes about disapproval. The 7:15 train arrived. The crowd moved forward with practiced efficiency, everyone knowing their place in the flow. Saris had positioned himself to board last, as he always did, taking up his standing spot only after everyone else was settled. The council representatives tried to board first. It created immediate problems. Voreth's bulk blocked the doorway. People behind him couldn't get through. The conductor's chimes became increasingly urgent as the schedule slipped. "You're causing delays," Bate announced. "Second part of the test failed." "This infrastructure is designed wrong," Voreth protested. "It's designed for everyone," Bate countered. "Humans built these trains knowing 47 different species would use them. The infrastructure isn't wrong. Your approach is." Finally, they managed to board. The ancient dragons took up most of the standing area, their wings brushing against other passengers, their tails taking up floor space, their presence making everyone uncomfortable. Saris had learned to make himself smaller somehow, to exist among others without overwhelming them. The council representatives radiated "I am here" in ways that made the entire car tense. The train lurched into motion. Voreth didn't adjust his stance and nearly fell into a Vorn. Shreni's tail lashed reflexively, forcing people to duck. Dolmetsch stayed very still, but his expression suggested he was finally understanding something. "How do you do this?" Dolmetsch asked Saris quietly. How do you make yourself fit? You stop trying to be the most important thing in the room, Saris replied. You become part of something instead of above it. The train carried them forward through the tunnels. Around them, regular commuters were going about their morning routines, reading tablets, chatting quietly, drinking coffee. They'd incorporated 3 massive ancient dragons into their commute, with minimal disruption, because they'd decided to tolerate the intrusion. But tolerance wasn't acceptance. The difference was subtle but profound. Vorath seemed to sense it. His eyes tracked the passengers, seeing how they deliberately didn't look at him, not from fear, from dismissal. They judged him rude and were treating him accordingly. Nobody had ever dismissed a dragon before. The conductor announced the next stop. Vorath pushed toward the door too early, blocking the aisle again. Wait for the train to stop, Sari said. You'll throw people off balance. I'll do as I please, Vorath snapped. The train braked. Vorath stumbled into 2 passengers. One of them pushed back, irritated. Learn some manners, they said, then realized what they'd said and to whom. But the damage was done. The trial was over, and everyone had seen exactly what they needed to see. The train arrived at Central Plaza to find the platform packed. Word had spread beyond Transit Station Gamma 7. News crews from 3 different networks had set up cameras. Security had to manage the crowd. This was no longer just about one dragon's choice. It had become something bigger. Bates stepped off first, her official observer tablet held ready. Based on documented evidence from tests 1 and 2, the council representatives have failed to demonstrate basic integration capabilities. They've caused property damage, scheduled delays, distressed passengers, violated courtesy protocols, and shown consistent inability to navigate shared spaces. This proves nothing, Vorath said, his voice tight with barely contained rage. These tests are designed to humiliate, not to measure true dragon worth. You set the question, Saris reminded him. You asked if I'd maintained dragon strength and pride. I'm showing you what strength looks like here. It's not about dominance, it's about coexistence. Weakness dressed up as philosophy, Shrenis hissed. You've become a domesticated pet performing tricks for your masters. Nobody here is anyone's master, Bates said firmly. That's the point you keep missing. Humans didn't conquer the galaxy. They built infrastructure and invited everyone to use it. There's no hierarchy here, just community. There's always hierarchy, Vorath insisted. The strong rule, the weak serve, that's nature. Nature, Griff said, stepping forward from the crowd, is what you make of it. Humans taught us. Something better than nature. They taught us civilization. The ancient dragons looked at the Pelion like he'd grown a second head. The concept seemed to genuinely confuse them. Dolmetsch, who'd been quiet throughout, finally spoke. I don't understand. Why would beings choose to limit themselves for the comfort of others? Where's the advantage? That's what I'm trying to show you, Saris said. The advantage is belonging. Look around. Every species here is different. Different needs, different abilities, different challenges. But the system works because everyone gives a little to make it work for everyone. And what does that give you? Dolmetsch asked. What do you personally gain? Saris looked at Bate, who'd spent her own time helping him. At Griff, who kept a special mug just for him. At the Quest child, who thought his scales were pretty. At the conductor, who'd closed his route to come support him. At all the beings who'd shown up, not because they had to, but because they'd decided he mattered. Everything, Saris said simply. I gain everything. The third test was supposed to happen next, the test of trust. But Vorath was done pretending. Enough of this farce, he declared, his voice carrying across the platform. You want to see dragon strength, real strength? I'll show you. His fire glands activated, heat building visibly in his throat. The crowd gasped and pulled back. Security moved forward but too slowly. Vorath wasn't targeting anyone specifically. He was just going to demonstrate raw power, burn something, prove that might was what mattered. Saris moved without thinking. Years of commuting had taught him the layout of the platform, the flow patterns, where people would be. He placed himself directly between Vorath and the crowd, spreading his wings wide. "Don't," Sari said quietly. "Please." "Move," Vorath commanded, "or burn with them." "No." It was the simplest word in any language, the most fundamental refusal. Sari stood his ground, knowing he wasn't strong enough to actually stop an ancient dragon, knowing his fire wasn't hot enough, his scales not thick enough, but standing anyway. "Because that's what you did for your community. You stood." Bait moved up beside him, then Griff, then the conductor, then dozens of others, different species forming a wall of bodies that said, "We're together in this." Vorath stared at them, fire dying in his throat, not from fear, from complete incomprehension. His entire worldview didn't have space for this, for prey defending each other, for the weak protecting the weaker, for everyone choosing solidarity over survival. "You've lost yourself," Vorath said finally, but his voice had lost its certainty. "This isn't dragon strength, this is... I don't even have words for what this is." "It's human strength," Bait said. "We gave it to the galaxy, the strength to care about strangers, to build systems that help everyone, to choose together over alone." Dolmetsch was watching the crowd with an expression that might have been wonder. "You all came here for him, not because you fear the council, not because you owe him debt. You came because he's our friend," the Quest child said, rolling forward with typical child fearlessness. "And friends help friends." The child looked up at the ancient dragons with colors flashing determined orange. "You're bullies. My parent says bullies are people who are mean because they're scared. What are you scared of?" Children, Sari's thought, had a way of cutting through everything complicated to reach the simple truth underneath. "Scared," Shreni said. "We fear nothing." "Then why are you so mean?" the child persisted. Dolmetsch made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been pain. "From the mouths of younglings, we're scared because what you've built here makes everything we are irrelevant. If strength doesn't require dominance, if power doesn't require fear, then what have we been for all these centuries?" "Alone," Sari said gently. "You've been alone, it's not too late to be something else." Vorath shook his massive head. "I cannot. This isn't changing, Saris, this is surrender." "Then I surrender," Sari said. "I surrender isolation for community. I surrender fear for trust. I surrender being above everyone for being among them, and I've never been stronger." The crowd around them erupted in cheers, not triumph over the council, just support for one of their own. Vorath turned away. Shrenis followed. They would leave, return to their caves, continue being alone together. Some people couldn't change even when change was offered. But Dolmetsch stayed. "I would like," he said slowly, "to try the third test. I would like to learn, whatever this is." "Integration," Bait said. "It's called integration, and it starts with riding the train like everyone else." 3 months. Later, Saris boarded the 8:15 train, same as always. Bait was in her usual seat, reading about Vorn crystalline communication patterns. Griff had the large coffee ready plus a second one for Dolmetsch, who still hadn't mastered the wing folding but was getting better. The ancient dragon squeezed through the turnstile with only minor scraping sounds. Small victories. "How was the job interview?" Bait asked Dolmetsch. "Strange," Dolmetsch replied. "They asked what value I could bring to the team, not what I could dominate or what I was strongest at, what value I could add to others." "And what did you say?" Saris asked. "I said I was still learning what that meant. They hired me anyway, said learning was valuable." The conductor chimed the departure signal. The train lurched into motion, carrying dozens of species toward their ordinary days. Outside, stars streaked past in lines of light. Sari sipped his coffee and watched Platform 12 disappear behind them. Somewhere on his homeworld, dragons sat alone in caves, counting gold nobody wanted, breathing fire at nothing, being magnificent and powerful and terribly, desperately alone. He'd made the right choice. "Next stop, Central Plaza," the conductor chimed. Bait looked up from her tablet. "You're coming to the interdisciplinary mixer tonight, right? I want to introduce you to the head of engineering. She's fascinated by your work on integration algorithms. I'll be there, Sari said. Then, because he still marveled at being able to say it, I'll bring Dolmetsch. He should meet more people. Friends, the Quest child said from across the aisle, colors flashing happy yellow. We're all friends. Yes, Sari's thought, that's exactly what we are. The hypertrain carried them forward through the dark, a tube of light and life and community moving through the vast empty space between stars. Inside, people who were nothing alike sat together, stood together, rode together toward whatever came next. And that Sari's knew was the real dream. Not flight, not gold, not power or fear or magnificent isolation. Just this, just riding the morning train with friends, knowing you belonged, knowing someone saved a mug for you, knowing children thought your scales were pretty. The dragon's dream wasn't flight. It was riding the hypertrain like everyone else.